There are points in financial history when the system doesn't warn you, it doesn't make noise, it doesn't send headlines, it simply shifts, quietly, mechanically, inevitably. And by the time the public realizes what happened, the architecture has already moved on. That's exactly where we are right now. The final pre-reset phase has begun, not because someone announced it, but because the global liquidity system is showing the unmistakable signs that the old rails can't stretch any further. Before we unpack this, remember, nothing in this video is financial advice. It's for informational and educational purposes only. Always consult a licensed financial professional before making investment decisions. And as of this moment, XRP is trading in the low $2 range. Now let's get to the truth of what's actually happening. The phrase pre-reset doesn't refer to a date, a prediction, or a dramatic event. In institutional language, a reset is when a system is forced to evolve because maintaining the old infrastructure is no longer possible. It's mechanical, it's mathematical, and it's unavoidable. This is what we're witnessing across the global settlement pipeline right now. The bond market is flashing instability. FX correlations are breaking. Gold liquidity is tightening. Tokenized assets are expanding faster than rails can settle, and OTC pathways, once abundant, are quietly thinning. These are not signals of a storm coming. These are signals the storm has already started. This is the final pre-reset phase. And here's the part most retail investors never understand. Resets don't begin when something breaks. They begin when institutions can no longer ignore the cost of inefficiency. Right now, inefficiency is becoming more expensive than transition. That is the real trigger. Let's walk through the first indicator, settlement pressure. Every major financial institution in the world operates within time windows. When volatility increases, those windows shrink. When they shrink too far, risk rises. When risk rises too high, institutions must adopt faster, neutral settlement layers. This is not opinion, this is liquidity math. Bond markets are moving thousands of percentage points faster than the rails beneath them. FX markets are slipping out of sync. Tokenized treasuries are clearing around the clock while banks close at 4. The old system is hitting its ceiling. Now the second indicator, OTC compression. For years, large buyers quietly accessed XRP through OTC channels. It avoided market disruption, it prevented price displacement, and it gave institutions a private way to build exposure without alerting retail. But OTC supply is not infinite, and recently block liquidity has started tightening. When that happens, institutions lose their private runway. They lose their ability to accumulate without visibility. And once OTC can't meet demand, they have no choice but to source from public markets. That's the moment retail sees what was happening all along. That's the moment the quiet phase ends. That's the moment the reset becomes visible. The third indicator, tokenization. Tokenized assets are not waiting for anyone. They are accelerating faster than banks anticipated. Tokenized treasuries, funds, real estate, commodities, every single one of them requires real-time settlement. But the legacy rails can't support it. Tokenization is a 24/7 market. The fiat settlement system is a 9-to-5 system patched together with delays and overnight batches. This mismatch forces the reset. The fourth indicator is the one almost nobody recognizes, global FX fragmentation. For decades, currencies moved in predictable pair structures. Today, those relationships are breaking. When FX markets become unstable, every institution faces higher settlement risk, slippage, collateral requirements, and conversion delays. This is the kind of environment where a bridge asset becomes not just useful, but mandatory. And that's where XRP enters this story, not as a speculative asset, but as a settlement tool engineered specifically for the pressures we're seeing right now. And here's your retention spike. The pre-reset phase isn't ahead of us. It already started the moment institutions began repositioning settlement pipelines away from traditional rails and toward real-time liquidity architecture. XRP doesn't need hype or headlines to validate this transition. The system itself is validating it. Every macro indicator points in the same direction. Liquidity is tightening everywhere. Settlement pressure is rising everywhere. Tokenization is accelerating everywhere. And the cost of inefficiency is exceeding the cost of innovation. That combination is what triggers a reset. The next section breaks down the mechanics of this reset. How institutions identify the moment the old system can't function anymore, and how they quietly prepare for the transition long before the public sees the impact. To understand what the final pre-reset phase actually means, you have to step inside the mindset of institutional settlement desks, the teams who monitor liquidity flows, risk windows, and the timing thresholds that determine how and when systems must evolve. Because unlike retail investors, institutions don't wait for charts, headlines, or narratives. They track friction, they track cost, they track inefficiency. And when the friction becomes more expensive than modernization, they move. This is how resets begin, not with panic, not with chaos, but with a cold calculation. The old system can no longer support what the market requires. Let's walk through the mechanical forces behind this. First, settlement windows are collapsing. Most people think settlement is simply moving money, but settlement is about timing. There are windows, sometimes minutes, sometimes hours, during which trades must clear to avoid exposure. When those windows shrink, the system becomes brittle. Right now, bond yields are fluctuating too quickly, FX spreads are widening too unpredictably, cross-border payments are hitting timing mismatches, tokenized assets are trading continuously. This creates stress across every settlement layer. It forces institutions into a corner where traditional rails can no longer keep pace. When settlement windows get too tight, the system doesn't improve, it upgrades. That is the essence of the pre-reset phase. 2. Liquidity pools are fracturing. Another sign of the reset is fragmented liquidity. In a healthy system, liquidity flows smoothly across banks, regions, and currencies. But in the current environment, Asian markets open with stressed liquidity, European markets inherit the volatility, US markets amplify it. Overnight cycles fail to resolve it. These fractures create bottlenecks, and bottlenecks are the enemy of settlement. The more fractured global liquidity becomes, the more valuable a unified neutral settlement asset becomes. That is XRP's role in this architecture, not as a speculative instrument, but as a liquidity equalizer. 3. Tokenization is outrunning the rails. This is the most underappreciated trigger. Tokenization is scaling faster than the settlement systems designed to support it. Tokenized treasuries, tokenized bonds, tokenized real estate, these are not ideas. They exist today, and they settle in minutes, not days. But the fiat rails behind them can't keep up. This creates a structural mismatch. Tokenized assets move in real time. Fiat settlement does not. That mismatch grows every single month. Eventually, it becomes intolerable. This is why institutions are preparing new corridors, modeling liquidity through bridge assets and testing real-time settlement, quietly, under NDAs, long before the public hears about any of it. That's the pre-reset phase, the moment tokenized markets become too large to ignore. 4th, OTC liquidity compression institutions have had a private runway for years, quiet OTC accumulation that didn't touch the open market, but that runway is shrinking. OTC is tightening across block order availability, private liquidity windows, negotiated settlement flexibility, institutional sourcing pathways. This creates a countdown effect, because once private accumulation becomes too constrained, institutions will have no choice but to source liquidity publicly. And when large entities start competing with retail on the open market, the shift doesn't happen gradually, it happens sharply. This is why the pre-reset phase matters so much. Once OTC compression reaches its inflection point, the public chart stops being driven by speculation and starts being driven by utility demand. 5. Ripple's institutional stack was built for this moment. Ripple didn't build a speculative product. Ripple built a settlement platform engineered for this exact period in global markets. Look at who designed the architecture. Former Morgan Stanley liquidity chiefs, former BlackRock strategists, former global banking executives, former treasury infrastructure specialists. You don't hire that caliber of expertise to build a meme coin. You hire them to reconstruct financial infrastructure. Their work, however, doesn't appear on charts. It appears in corridor development, liquidity modeling, regulatory alignment, banking integrations, pilot settlement frameworks, institutional partnerships, all invisible to retail. All critical to institutions, all signs of a pre-reset system in motion. 6. Retail misreads the quiet phase. During a pre-reset phase, retail always assumes the market is dead. Ironically, this is the phase when institutions are the most active, because they know the final move isn't visible, it's structural. Retail asks, why isn't the price moving? Institutions ask, how much longer can this infrastructure hold before change becomes mandatory? These are two different worlds. When sentiment is quiet, liquidity is shifting. When charts are still, institutions are repositioning. When nothing seems to be happening, everything is happening. That is the emotional trap of the pre-reset phase. And most investors fall for it. But you're not most investors. You're following the macro indicators. You're reading the settlement signals. You're watching the structural pressures. You're not reacting, you're understanding. This is the part of the cycle where everything becomes clear if you know how resets actually unfold. They never begin with a dramatic announcement or a single explosive moment. They unfold quietly, through liquidity stress, infrastructure failures, settlement compression, and institutional repositioning. Long before the public has any idea, a transition is underway. And by the time retail investors finally see something, the shift has already happened. That's where we are right now. The final pre-reset phase is not theory. It's not a date someone predicts. It's the mechanical moment when the system can no longer maintain its own weight. Bond markets can't tolerate slow settlement. Tokenized assets can't wait for overnight clearing windows. Banks can't operate with widening FX spreads and unpredictable liquidity cycles. OTC channels can't supply institutions indefinitely. The pressure is converging, the rails are aging, and the new system isn't optional, it's necessary. That's what a reset looks like in the real world, the moment modernization becomes cheaper than inefficiency. And the asset built for that modernization, XRP, sits at the center of the new architecture. Not because of hype, but because of design. Because it solves the specific problems the system can no longer ignore. This is why the calm before the shift matters. This is why understanding the quiet phase matters. This is why you're here. While most people are staring at day-to-day price action, you're paying attention to the forces that actually drive resets: liquidity, settlement, tokenization, and institutional behavior. You're reading the signals beneath the surface. You're focused on the mechanics, not the noise. And if you made it to the end of this video, then you're not just watching the story, you're ahead of it. So before you go, tap like, hit subscribe, and comment the phrase pre-reset. That tells me you're one of the few who understands where we really are in this cycle, and how close we are to the moment when the quiet preparation becomes a visible global shift. This is Matrix Millionaire, and the final pre-reset phase has already begun.